Erev Tov Rabotai, we're continuing with our Mishna Yomi Masechet Challah. We're up to Perek Bet Mishnah Hey. Today's Mishnayot should be Leilu Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana Aranbayev and Eliyahu ben Burcha Israelov, Menuchatam Began Eden, Amen. We know that the requirement to separate Challah does not take effect until the dough is kneaded. The Mishnah now discusses the halacha, the law, where someone separated challah from flour before it was kneaded. The Mishnah says, Hamafrish chalato kemach ena challah. If someone separates his challah from flour, the halacha is that it is not challah, because challah must be taken from dough, not flour, like the Torah says in Sefer Bamidbar, chapter 15, pasuk 20, Reshit arisotechem. The Torah calls challah the first of your doughs. This teaches that only challah taken from dough is considered challah, not challah taken from flour. And the Mishnah continues, V'gazel biat kohen. If he gives his challah to a kohen, it is considered stolen goods in the hands of the kohen, and the kohen must return it. Now the Mefarshim explain that really in actuality, midoraita, the kohen is not required to return the flour. Now, although the challah is invalid and the owner must separate challah again, like the Mishnah is going to teach us, the kohen can claim the owner gave it to him as a gift. However, the rabbis were concerned that the owner might think he fulfilled his obligation to separate, that he fulfilled his obligation, his challah obligation with the flour that he gave. Therefore, to make it clear that the challah was invalid, they required the kohen to return it to the owner. But we will see later in the Mishnah that the owner may not eat the flour, rather he sells it to a kohen. The Mishnah continues, the dough itself that the owner needs from the rest of the flour is still subject to the challah obligation, because since the challah separated from the flour was invalid, the owner must separate another challah portion from the dough. The Mishnah now returns to discuss the halachot of the flour that the owner gave as challah. Regarding the challah flour that was given to the kohen, if it has the minimum amount that is subject to challah, which is 1 1/4 kavs, it is subject to challah. And Mefarshim explain the case is the owner had originally given the kohen 1 1/4 kavs of flour as challah. The kohen then returned this flour to the owner like he's required to do so, and the owner made it into dough. The dough is subject to challah obligation. Now, although there is normally no obligation to separate challah from the portion of challah given to a kohen, here the flour is not actual challah, therefore the dough needed from this flour is subject to the challah obligation like other flour. If, however, the flour is less than 1 1/4 kavs, it is exempt from challah. And the reason being because the flour was separated from the rest of the flour when the owner gave it to the kohen. Therefore, it must have the minimum challah amount by itself in order to be obligated in challah. The Mishnah continues, V'asura lezarim, and all the flour that was originally given to the kohen as challah is forbidden to non-kohanim. Now, even though the Mishnah previously just ruled that the flour must be returned to the owner, nevertheless, the Mishnah is telling us he may not eat it since it may be eaten only by a kohen, and the purpose of returning it is so that the owner may now sell the flour to a kohen. Now, although the flour is not challah, the rabbis forbade it to non-kohanim as if it were challah. And the Mefarshim explain, the rabbis were concerned that since the flour was given to a kohen as challah, people will mistakenly think that it is really challah. Now, although the rabbis required the kohen to return it to the owner in order to show that it's not challah, there might still be some people who think that it is challah since they saw it being given to a kohen. If the flour would be permitted to non-kohanim, these people will think the non-kohanim may eat challah, and therefore in order to prevent this mistake, the rabbis forbade non-kohanim from eating it. Divrei Rabbi Yeshua, these are the words of Rabbi Yeshua. Amrulo, however, the Chachamim, they disagreed with the last ruling of Rabbi Yeshua. They said to him, Maaseh ukfashah zaken zar. There was an incident in which challah was separated from flour, and an elder, which refers to a Torah scholar who was a non-kohen, he grabbed it and ate it. The Chachamim say this proves that non-kohanim may eat such challah. And the Mefarshim explained the case of the Chachamim. The owner of the flour had separated the flour as challah, given it to a kohen. Now the Mishnah ruled previously that the kohen must return such challah. The Torah, since the Mishnah says that the kohen has to return the challah, the Torah scholar had the right to grab it. Now this is obviously speaking of a case where the Torah scholar himself was the original owner, or he grabbed it with the owner's permission. But in any event, the rabbis say from this incident that from the fact that the Torah scholar who was a non-kohen grabbed it and ate it, proves non-kohanim can eat such challah. Amar lem, Rabbi Yeshua said to them, Afu kilkel atzmo. The Torah scholar, in fact, ruined matters for himself, meaning the Torah scholar actually committed a sin by eating the challah and he was punished for it. And Rabbi Yeshua, the Mefarshim explain, Rabbi Yeshua responded that while the scholar was a learned person and could be relied on for divrei halacha, halachic matters, in this particular case he made a mistake and he thought it was permitted to eat the flour separate as challah, but in truth it is forbidden. V'tiken la'achrim, but the Mishnah does say, Rabbi Yeshua responded, even though he ruined matters for himself by sinning, he did fix matters for others who eat such challah, because now they base their actions on the Torah scholar to do this. Therefore, their sin is shogeg, it's unintentional. But at any rate, the Torah scholar, according to Rabbi Yeshua, acted incorrectly, and no proof can be brought from his actions. Now, Rabbi Yeshua's main point again is that the Torah scholar himself sinned, but once he mentions how that act affected himself, he explains how it affected others. But in any event, that is Rabbi Yeshua's response to the Chachamim. And that is in Rabotai of Mishnah Hey. Mishnah Vav now elaborates on the minimum amount of flour that is a challah obligation. Chameshet riva'im kemach chayavet b'challah. 5 riva'im, which is 1 1/4 kavs of flour, are subject to the challah obligation. Now a rova, which plural riva'im, is 1/4 of a kav. So 5 riva'im are 1 1/4 kavs. Now the Torah in Sefer Bamidbar, chapter 15, pasuk 20, refers to the challah as rishit arisotechem, the first of your doughs. That teaches us that only an amount that is considered your dough is subject to the obligation of challah. Since this mitzvah was told to the Jews while they were in the midbar, in the wilderness, the phrase your dough arisotechem refers to their daily meal at that time, which was a portion of manna, the man. Accordingly, the amount that is obligated in challah is the same amount as the daily portion of manna. The Torah says in Sefer Shemot, chapter 16, pasuk 16 and 36, that the amount of daily manna was 1/10 of an ephah. An ephah equals 18 kavs, so a tenth of that would be 1 4/5 kavs. That would be the amount that is subject to the obligation of challah. Right, 1 4/5 kavs. Now these measurements are given in Shurei Midbar, the wilderness units, meaning the units of measurements that they used in the wilderness. Because in the times of the Mishnah, however, in the times of the Mishnah, the size of standard measures was increased according to the new measurements, which we know as tzipori units. The Mefarshim explain 1 4/5 kavs of wilderness kavs were now 1 1/4 of our kavs. Therefore, the Mishnah states that the minimum amount for challah is 1 1/4 tzipori kavs, which would be 1 4/5 wilderness unit kavs. Now, the weight of this amount of flour in contemporary measure ranges from 3 2/3 to 5 pounds, which would be 1 2/3 to 2 1/4 kilograms, depending on the opinion that you follow. We have different opinions on how to measure things. The Mishnah now discusses what components of the dough count towards this amount. Hem, usoran, v'suban, umursanan, chameshet riva'im. If the flour, its sourdough, fine bran, and coarse bran equal 5 riva'im, chayavin. It is subject to the challah obligation. Sourdough, the Mefarshim say, based on this Mishnah, sourdough counts towards the challah minimum because it is a normal ingredient that is added to dough. Now, sourdough on its own is exempt from challah because it's inedible. Nevertheless, when combined with other dough, it can contribute to the challah minimum because sourdough is added to dough to help it rise. Therefore, it's considered part of the dough. And fine and coarse bran count because they are found in bread eaten by poor people, and therefore they too are considered part of the dough. Now the bran that we discuss here is not eaten on its own. Therefore, like sourdough, it's exempt from challah, but it can combine with the dough to create a challah obligation because some people eat bread that contains bran. Therefore, it's considered a normal ingredient of dough. Nital musanan mitochan v'chazar letochan arelu pturin. The Mishnah continues to say, if the coarse bran was removed from these 5 riva'im of flour and then put back in, they are exempt from the challah obligation because even poor people do not add bran to their dough when making bread. Therefore, such bran is not a normal ingredient of the dough and cannot count towards the challah minimum. And the Mefarshim explains, since even poor people do not add bran to their dough, the bran cannot be considered part of the dough enough to create a challah obligation. That is on Rabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.